Alright, it's time for another update and forecast on the park fire. Like all our update and forecasts, what we're going to do is try to figure out kind of where the park fire is active right now, what kind of behavior we're seeing, what kind of wildfire conditions we could expect throughout the day today, what's going on in the weather forecast. That's going to determine where some of our growth is in the future. So as we've always done in these videos, it can get a little complicated, and I could go off on all sorts of different tangents. So I actually got this idea from my mom yesterday. I was asking her about how she thinks I can maybe make these videos more understandable to provide a better service, and she said it would be useful to have a framework, so if people are only interested in one thing, then they can click to that part of the video. So what I'm going to do today is try to break this up into previous activity, current situation, and wildfire forecast. And then what I'll do is I'll put the timestamps for these different sections in the top comment. I'll pin it to the comments, and then you could just click to that section, or in the time bar below, you'll be able to see those different sections. So first one, previous activity. What that's going to involve is trying to figure out what has been happening. The first thing we should do is figure out where we are on this fire, just in case anyone's not too familiar with the area. We have Chico to the south, Red Bluff to the west, Butte Meadows to the east, Paradise to the southeast, Manton and Shingletown up towards the north. And I'll pretty much just say right now it's probably the last time I'm going to talk about those areas, because in some of the previous activity that we've had, there's, well, not really been any activity there recently. On this map where you see the yellow, orange, and red stars is where we've had some heat detections. And you notice none on the north, west, or south, so we're looking great in those areas. I believe they've even been downgrading a lot of the evacuation orders to warnings, and then even some of the warnings to no evacuation alerts at all. So where has the most recent activity been, and where are some of the threats? It's going to be on this northeastern finger right there. You can see that that's where you see those red stars, which is where some of the heat has been currently. And then the key spots that we're looking at there are going to be Mineral and Mill Creek. And you can see how close the fire has gotten to those communities, but as you can also see, it has not gone into those communities. So that is some great news there. Also keep in mind that some of this fire perimeter up here is not actually just the wildfire raging through this area. It's actually some of the firing operations that they've done. And the way you can always tell a firing operation is that it goes right along a road like that. So you see 36. This is actually a great update that we have right here, because in one of the previous perimeters, I think it was maybe lower resolution or something, but it had showed that the fire perimeter had gone over 36. And maybe we have gotten some spots over it, but right now it doesn't look like the fire itself has really slopped over 36 yet. So that's exactly what we want to see right there. It does look like it's kind of jumped over 172 on this eastern side, but the key spots that we've been following, Mill Creek, it looks like their firing operation worked, where it's basically steered the fire towards the north, and then to the south, that was their previous firing operation there. I keep saying firing operation, the definition. It's basically they light the fire when the conditions are more favorable, so that when the fire itself gets to that area, the fuel is already cleared out, so then they don't just rush through the community. So great to see that for Mill Creek. You can see it even on a street view right there. And then a similar story around Mineral as well. That's a firing operation. And then we have had a lot of activity there previously, but it looks like it has not gone straight towards Mineral. Something that's helped us there is we've had southwesterly winds that have been pushing this fire towards the northeast. And then when it comes to, so we have had some growth recently. When it comes to that growth, we're up to 427,000 acres. And I think that actually just updated 4 minutes ago. So that's going to put us at the number 4 largest wildfire in California history. And Mendocino Complex is number 3. That's 460,000. So we'll see if we end up jumping up to number 3, but still have a ways to go there. And I mean, based on the wildfire forecast later in this video, we'll see how much more growth is expected. But just showing kind of the history of this growth, the majority of that acreage, I do want to first say that the majority of the acreage burn might actually be beneficial burning. Out of that, 427,000? I don't know, maybe 370,000 of that will actually provide ecological benefits to this area. So, it's always a scary number. You hear 427,000 acres of destruction and scorched earth, but some of that's going to be low severity burning that will clear out some of the fuels that have accumulated for decades, and then you just have maybe some new sprouts come in. I've heard Zeke Lunder talk about the fact that that's good for some of the deer populations. And most of that growth was in the first week of the fire. If you remember that, we had strong southerly winds that were quickly pushing this fire towards the north. It was burning about 10 to 15 miles per day, and then it calmed down for about a week. And then in the last few days, we've seen the activity pick up once again. And that's what the colors are showing on this map. Blue is going to be your growth that first week. Then there was very little growth for the second week. And then the last few days is what you see in red right here, where the fire has once again been active. Now, your question might be, why has it been active? And that really comes down to what our weather has been doing. So we had some cooler, more moist conditions move in during that, and the winds calmed down during that week where there wasn't very much growth. And sorry if my voice is shaky. I'm recording this in the studio where I work. I'm a broadcast meteorologist on the Central Coast. And you've probably heard this about like Letterman or some of those late night talk shows. But they keep the studio freezing cold so that we're not sweaty and shiny on camera. But yeah, I'm almost shivering right now. I should have brought a jacket to work today. So sorry about that. I'm also partially losing my voice just because I've been doing so many of these wildfire updates. But back to kind of why our progression chart looks like this, and why it picked up over the last few days. That was the question we were trying to answer here. When it was not active, we had cooler conditions, and because the winds really calmed down, we saw the smoke just settle over the fire. So something we can see here, I'm not sure why that's not, there we go, is solar radiation, how much sunlight was reaching the surface, was pretty low when we had minimal activity because the fire was covered in smoke. We weren't getting as hot. You could see the temperature actually was just in the low 80s. And then what happened over the last few days is a lot of that smoke cleared out, and then we've also had a warming trend. So that's August 4th, August 5th, August 6th, August 7th. And that's where fire activity really picked up towards the beginning of this week. Interestingly, yesterday, we didn't have all that much activity. And a big part of the reason for that was we had smoke settle over the fire because we had so much activity in the previous couple days. The other thing that's been happening is as the temperatures have gone up, relative humidity has gone way down. Remember on August 3rd and August 4th, we had that monsoonal moisture move into California. It even brought some light drizzle to the fire. We love to see that. But then as things have warmed up and that monsoonal moisture moved out of California, we've just been getting drier and drier. And even in the overnight hours, what you would like to see in your relative humidity chart is at night it going back up to 60 to 70%. But we have been under 20% relative humidity, at least at the Lassen Lodge site right here, since it looks like the afternoon of August 6th. We have been below 20% relative humidity. So that accounts for a lot of this growth that we've seen on this northeastern finger. But the reason, and I say it's mostly because of relative humidity, something I could also throw in there is fuel, because if we look at fire history, and this is going to be something important when we get into the wildfire forecast, is we have the Ponderosa fire to the west, kind of protecting Manton and Shingletown, and we have the Dixie fire to the east, which is most likely going to limit growth moving forward. Where we've had a lot of that growth the last couple of days, and that finger, that's orange and red, that fuel right there has been accumulating for decades. So there's a lot of fuel, and then it's also been exceptionally dry because our relative humidity has been under 20%, and then we've also just had a lot of heat this summer. Everybody remembers that big heat wave we had to start July. So fuel, humidity, the big drivers of the fire over the last few days. Not so much wind. I mean, on August 5th, we did get some gusts up to 15 miles per hour. But when the fire was first taking off, we had consistent winds around 20 to 30 miles per hour. And then just tying in some of our numbers here, this, I don't know if that's been updated recently, but unfortunately, we have seen 49 structures damaged on this fire and 636 structures destroyed. One thing I will say is we actually haven't seen that number come up very much recently. I don't know if that's just because they're using more of their resources for maybe fighting the fire and they're not sending out as many damage assessment teams, or if they've done all the assessments and we just haven't had any new structures destroyed, which might be more the case because when we look at structures here, the area where we've had a lot of that recent growth, we can't actually confirm that where you see those orange dots within the fire perimeter, that those were actually destroyed as this fire moved towards the northeast. There's maybe a good chance because we did have some high severity burning in there and some pretty extreme fire behavior, but I do know that they were putting, lines all over the place. We can actually see some of those on this map right here. And lines all over the place, and they were preparing some of those structures before the fire went through. So with that, it doesn't look like they've done any damage assessments in where we've had some of the new growth, but you can find this damage assessment map by going into the description of this video, clicking the link that says CAL FIRE, and then what you can do is actually click into this map, and it will even show pictures of the structures. So I know that can be useful to any locals who maybe haven't been able to go back in, or maybe still are just wondering maybe what's happened in your neighborhood. So I think that kind of sums up the previous activity. Maybe the last thing we can do is click on and off our most recent perimeters that we have to work with here. So northeastern finger, that is the map we were looking at yesterday, and then this is going to be the map that we have today. And I don't know exactly when this fire perimeter data came from, but it's the most recent one I have to work with. So it looks like it is mostly in this northeastern section right there, but some of that is going to be our firing operation. If I had to kind of give my best estimate, anywhere where you see it along a road or right around mineral or in just that weird shape right there around the west and eastern side, that's most likely going to be your firing operation. What is maybe the front of the fire and the wildfire itself moving is going to be that finger that you'll then see extend right down into there. And it looks like it's maybe bumped into where they did have the firing operation, because again, on that side right there goes right along the road. And it doesn't look like it's crossed over 36 just yet. So just to kind of conclude, the previous activity hasn't gone into mineral, as the most recent perimeter that we have to work with says. Doesn't look like it has crossed 36 on the north, although we've most likely had a few spots going over there. It does look like it's slopped over 172 right here, but it doesn't look like it's gone into Mill Creek. And I would say that was the area I was the most worried about over the last few days. So it's great to see that their bold firefighting with doing that firing operation as of right now appears to be paying off. So I think that sums up previous activity. Now we can get into the current wildfire situation. And I think the best way to start there is always just looking at the fire itself. So where you see that in a dark shadow, some of that black, that's going to be the previous fire perimeter. And then where you see the smoke coming off of the fire is, where we're seeing some activity right now. So again, on that northeastern section, and that matches up with, we'll clean that map up a little bit, what the fire activity map is saying as well. And then one thing I noticed early in the morning, all that smoke that was settling, especially in Mill Creek drainage right there. And then now that smoke is starting to clear out. So that's going to be the big question mark on fire activity today, is how quickly that smoke's going to clear out directly over the fire, because that's where we're going to have a potential large increase in activity once that smoke burns off. Not sure what's going on with our little camera right here. Maybe I'll try to reload it and look at the last maybe hour. So notice we do still have that lower layer of smoke, and that seemed to help us out yesterday to limit activity, but then we are starting to see it punch up. So from that camera angle, it definitely still looks active. And then trying another camera angle, this one is from just west of Lake Almanor. Again, that's going to be a lot of smoke over the fire, so that's going to limit some of the sunlight that's reaching the surface, which is going to limit how much it's heating up, which limits how much it dries out. There are some spots where it is punching through there, though. I'd say it looks very similar to yesterday. If not, I would even say yesterday looked a little bit more active than it's looking right now. So that's a good sign. And one other thing that you notice, I mentioned that this is west of Lake Almanor. Look at the Dixie Fire burn scar right there, and what the Dixie Fire did to some of the fuels in this area. So that is going to, let's go fire history. That is going to really limit growth on this northeastern side, because we were talking about how it's bumped over 172 in that one area, but once it gets into the Dixie Fire here, a lot of that growth, as we can see in that image right there, has already been cleared out. So we're not going to see it, the fire is going to lose steam once it goes into the Dixie Fire. I think where there would be more of a concern is as it goes up towards the north here, but as of right now, it looks like they're holding it on 36. So the current situation, let's just go to perimeters only. I mean, what I'd imagine they're trying to do is basically fill in where they've done those previous firing operations. You're most likely still going to see the fire fill into those areas, but then their hope would be to hold it at 36, hold it to the east of Mineral, definitely not let it get into Mill Creek, and then, it's most likely going to continue to rush up here, but then it bumps up into the Dixie Fire burn scar. And I should turn on structures here. Looks like there are some structures right around there, but as of right now, they've been keeping it out of that area, keeping it out of Mill Creek, and it does look like there's a couple of spots right here. But notice, even if those spots start to take off, once they get into that burn scar, they're going to slow down. And then one thing that's also working in our favor for Mineral today is the other camera angle that we can look at. Mineral looks like it's socked in with smoke right now. So if we look at the current conditions, Mill Creek is 90 degrees, and areas west of the fire are up in the high 80s. Mineral's 74 degrees right now. Minimum relative humidity, 38%. That's not too bad. Max RH overnight was around 63%. So that definitely helps Mineral as well. The other thing that helps Mineral is, oops, didn't mean to do that. Oops. All right. My Google Earth is going rogue. All right. So zooming back up here into Mineral, there's a couple things working in Mineral's favor. One, we have that firing operation. So as the main fire kind of tries to get down into Mineral, the fuels have already been cleared out there. But even if the fire were to kind of spot over the firing operation, we do have this big meadow right here where you have a big change in your fuels. So certainly still some dense fuel right there. So if it were to spot over 172, it could still burn there. Keep in mind, though, it'd be going downhill, and fires don't like to go downhill as much. When they go uphill, they can preheat some of the fuels, so then they're able to go a lot faster. But more importantly, we have this big meadow right there where the fuels are not that dense timber that we've been doing a lot of the burning in other locations. For example, if I go in here, fuels involved, it says overall the primary fuel types burning are timber, understory, and litter, grass, and brush. So timber, understory, and litter, and that's what we wouldn't have if it continues to burn into that meadow right there. But right now it looks like it's holding out the firing operation. Given the kind of videos we've been seeing, certainly looks like it's active right now, but it doesn't look like one of those days where it jumps over firing operations and gets super out of control. It's looking less active than yesterday, and it based on the perimeter information that we have to go off of, it seems like they controlled it pretty well yesterday. So one other thing we can do here is try to actually see if there is some heat coming off of the fire right now. Wow, that's, I would actually say, pretty good news. If you think back to what this has looked like in previous days, I'll kind of clean it up a little bit. We'll turn off fire history for a moment. In some days, we click on this map, and there are 16 of these red boxes all over the fire. There's a ton of heat being generated. That's very little heat. And where we do see that heat, keep in mind that's also going to overestimate the amount of heat, because partially what it's doing is picking up on the heat that's in the smoke plume. So that right there is an overestimate. And even with that, look at our fire history. If that were to just continue to burn, it would go into the Dixie fire, and then it's going to run out of steam right there. It does look like we still have some heat popping up on this western side, and that's something that I'd imagine, oh yeah, that was perfect timing. We look at right there, and they have some helicopters doing some drops on that western side as we speak. So that looks to be where the current heat is right now. So then you might worry that heat would then make a rush towards mineral, but one, we've got the air attack on it right now. Two, we have 6,500 personnel spread across this fire, 188 dozers, and you know that's one of their top priorities. And then we also are going to have more southwesterly winds today. We could even click that on right there. So what that would try to do is actually just push that heat back into itself. Instead of, if we had a southerly wind, I'd be more worried about mineral, because then that would push it straight towards mineral. Although then it would be also going downhill and through a meadow, so we wouldn't see that much extreme activity. But that's going to hopefully take that heat, push it back into itself, take this heat, push it into the Dixie fire. So just gave you a little sneak peek of the weather, but I think that maybe wraps up section number 2. So now we can actually get into the wildfire forecast. So this is maybe a good place to start, which is where we have the current heat right now. Still on that little western side right there where they're hitting with the air attack, and then also on this very northeastern side where I believe that's probably the same place where we did see it slop over 172, and then where it does look like there was a couple of spots out here. Or that actually looks a bit more like a firing operation now that I look at it again, and I think this perimeter actually just updated. That looks like a firing operation, so maybe they've been purposely clearing out some of the fuel. So if that slop over starts to go up, what is that, Doe Mountain, then some of the fuels have already been cleared out. But even if it does go through, then we have the Dixie fire right there. So something that would determine kind of our activity today, because right now it looks like there's not much going on, but I think in one of the reports I was reading that they're expecting the inversion to lift potentially around 2 p.m., and then we could see an increase in activity there. And what's really going to decide that is what happens with our weather. So just looking at Mill Creek right now, that station is showing 91 degrees at the moment, min relative humidity 7%. Luckily, the winds aren't all that strong again today, around 11 miles per hour. But if we look at the forecast here, it looks like we're going to start moving in the right direction. So it's still exceptionally hot and dry today. That's why we are still seeing some activity on the fire. But as we get into tomorrow, you can't tell as much right here, but it is going to start to cool down slightly, and we're going to see a little bit more moisture move in. And then Saturday night, it looks like we have some of the best humidity recoveries that we've seen in a while. So just the general trend here about what's going to happen on this fire, it looks like we're moving in the right direction. We've had this big ridge over, or this big high over the west over the last few days. That's where a lot of the heat has been coming from. That is going to be exiting, moving over Texas, and what's going to take its place is a pretty good troughing pattern. And what that's going to do, well, it's two things. It can be kind of good and bad news for a fire. Hopefully it's more of the good news. What it can do is lead to much cooler conditions. That's some cold air that's going to be dipping down from Alaska. Where it can be actually kind of detrimental is if we come back here. Look how far apart those isobars are there, the lines of constant pressure. When they're that far apart, you have very calm winds. That's why our winds have only been around 10 miles per hour at the most the last few days, 15 mile per hour gusts at the most. But as the trough moves in, watch as those lines get closer together. So that will lead to some windier conditions in the days ahead, and looks like maybe more so next week. But as that trough dips down, it's also going to cool things off. So that can have good and bad consequences, but right now, I'm personally happy to see that we're going to be cooling down. Right now, we are still about 5 to 10 degrees above average. But if we click into next week, you'll start to see a bit more blue showing up on this until we're actually around 5 to potentially 10 degrees below average. And then when that happens, you end up getting a bit more moisture, not only in the afternoons, but in the overnight hours as well, as we were seeing on this chart right here. And I picked a dry spot to show this chart. That's today, tonight, tomorrow night. I was seeing one report that we may actually have relative humidity go up to maybe 60-70% as we get into Saturday night. Some of that moisture would find its way into the fuels, and then that would significantly calm down fire behavior. And then we talked about how it's below average in the long range. I think an easier way to see that is the 6 to 10 day temperature probability outlook. That's a fancy way of saying we're going to be cool with below average temperatures in the long range forecast, 6 to 10 days out. So I think the question mark in terms of the weather forecast really comes down to those isobars getting closer together and how much our winds pick up, and if that's going to lead to an increase in activity. But looking at where the fire is and where some of the heat is right now, it's kind of running out of room to run. As long as, what winds we do have are from the southwest. So this is a pretty good setup, I have to say. Where we do have the heat right now, worst comes to worst, it just gets pushed into the Dixie fire. And then it really runs out of steam because the fuels have been burnt out there. And then mineral, the winds, again, would push that heat back into the fire. We have a meadow, it's going downhill towards mineral, so we're looking fairly good right there as well. And then if we go perimeters only and look at Mill Creek, let's turn off the wind. Now Mill Creek is almost completely surrounded by fuels that have been cleared out. So they might be one of the safest communities in California now. I mean, I probably shouldn't say that while we're still in a fire, and we are still seeing a decent amount of activity right now, even when we do have the smoke shading. But, I mean, I have to say, I think things are looking a lot better on the park fire, and especially a lot better right now than what we were seeing Monday, Tuesday. Now, with that being said, when the inversion lifts today, we're going to have to see what happens. We may see a large increase in activity later this afternoon, or it might be like yesterday, where we don't see all that much growth, and they seem to control it pretty well. So, northeastern side, that's what I'll be watching moving forward. But again, in the 7-day forecast, we're just going to be cooling off every single day until the middle of next week, where below average temperatures are expected. One wild card in the forecast I would say that I'm watching right now is what happens when those winds pick up more so next week. So keeping an eye on that, but hopefully this video is helpful. Hopefully you kind of liked the new format where we went through previous activity, current situation, wildfire forecast. It's the first time I've tried it, so I think I found myself repeating myself a bit more than I would have liked. But maybe as I get used to this format, it'll end up being helpful both for me and for viewers, just to kind of provide some structure to some of the tangents that I can occasionally go on. So I think that summarizes the park fire overall. Say we're in a pretty good position today, especially considering where we were at the beginning of this week. I would say that is in large part due to some of the bold firefighting that they've been doing that as of right now seems to be paying off. So huge thanks to those 6,592 personnel that we have on this fire doing a lot of big, difficult work over the last few weeks. So thanks to all of them, and hopefully this video is helpful. Thanks for watching.